A very good evening to all of you here today. Thank you very much for joining us for this special media briefing on the occasion of the visit of Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji into Washington. We have today with us to give a sense of the first day's meetings. Honorable Foreign Secretary Vardhan Shringla, also accompanying us here, Ambassador of India to USA, Shri Taranjit Singh Sandhu, and from Delhi, Joint Secretary of the Americas Division, Srimati Vani Rao. I thank them all for their presence here. We will request Foreign Secretary Sir to say a few words to explain what is the developments of the day, and then we will take a few questions. Sir, the floor is yours.
Namaste and good evening to all our friends from the media. As you're aware, Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi arrived at Washington DC last evening. He has been accompanied by a high-level delegation consisting of the External Affairs Minister, National Security Advisor, and senior officials. He has had a number of engagements today, and I'll try and give you a sense of some of those engagements. This included his meeting with the Honorable Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, a bilateral meeting with the Prime Minister of Australia, Mr. Scott Morrison, a bilateral meeting with the Prime Minister of Japan, Yoshihide Suga. He also met select CEOs of US companies, and these meetings were separate. Let me start sequentially. This morning, the Prime Minister met the CEOs of 5 major US corporates. As you know, the United States is our single largest trading partner. It is also a source of foreign direct investments and a major economic partner of ours. In that context, the companies that the Prime Minister, the CEOs of companies that the Prime Minister met today represent those companies that have already invested significant amounts and propose to expand their investments or are planning significant investments in India. I'll just quickly, I think you have already got a readout of the meetings. The CEOs have gone on record, but I'll try and put it in perspective very briefly. The first company the Prime Minister met was Qualcomm. This is a global leader in chip manufacturing. They're a very high-tech company. The Prime Minister discussed connectivity, 5G connectivity and Digital India flagship program with the CEO of Qualcomm. The CEO was very, very optimistic on India. He called it the #1 growth destination for companies in the world. The second CEO that the Prime Minister met was the CEO of Adobe. Again, this is a company that has made enormous strides using technology in the creative domain. The Prime Minister discussed education technology, startups, innovation, animation for the youth. There was a lot of discussion on how technology can benefit younger people, particularly students, school-going students, and again, a very, very useful meeting. The third meeting was with the CEO of First Solar. This is a leader in solar making equipment. They manufacture, their technology is a new one. This is a very unique technology in the field of solar energy using thin film technology, and discussion centered around their plans to invest significant amounts in setting up solar manufacturing facility in India. I'm told that they're looking at a facility which has a capacity of 3.3 gigawatts. As you can imagine, that's a very significant capacity and investments worth $675 million. The CEO of First Solar discussed also the green hydrogen mission that the Prime Minister had announced, and there was also sense of interest in the Prime Minister's vision of one world, one sun, one grid. The fourth company was General Atomics, which centered around India's recent drone policy, including the PLI scheme. And the last group was the Blackstone Group, which has made, it's a major asset management company. It has a very large presence in India. It is a very significant investor in India, and from what I can see, they have, the CEO announced plans to invest significantly more in the country. He referred to India as the #1 performing country in the world. I'm quoting him. And there was a clear message from the business leaders of their appreciation of the recent reform measures in India that has made India a more business-friendly environment with liberal investment rules across different sectors. And of course, they felt that there were significant investment opportunities in India. Prime Minister had a bilateral meeting with Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris. This was the Prime Minister's first formal interaction with the Vice President. You're aware that he has spoken to her on telephone, and the meeting, which was the first meeting, as I said, in person, was warm. The meeting focused on several substantive issues of discussion. Both the Prime Minister and Vice President Kamala Harris appreciated the India-US bilateral relationship, which they felt were on a strong footing, with given the shared values, common interests, and growing strategic convergence that was there. They exchanged views on recent regional developments of mutual interest, reaffirmed their commitments towards a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. The COVID-19 situation and respective national efforts to combat it was an important theme of their discussion. In particular, they took note of the ongoing efforts to contain the pandemic through expedited vaccination efforts. Here, I think the Vice President was noted that India had made a very, very swift recovery from the second wave of the pandemic. She also commented on the fact that India had been supportive and had assisted several countries across the world in combating the pandemic, including through the export of vaccines. The Prime Minister thanked the US government for its generous support during the second wave of our pandemic. He also expressed thanks to the private sector and NGOs for that support. The two leaders discussed future areas of collaboration, including space cooperation, information technology, emerging and critical technologies, cooperation in the healthcare sector. The Prime Minister and the Vice President acknowledged the vibrant people-to-people ties between our two countries and appreciated the mutually beneficial education linkages, the flow of knowledge, innovation, talent between our two countries, and the need to nurture them. The contribution of Indian professionals, especially in the IT domain, biotechnology, space, and other areas which represent the knowledge economy, was appreciated by both, and there was a sense that India had capable professionals and RD capacity in the high-tech sector, including research and development capacities, and the US, which is known for cutting-edge technologies and innovation, were obvious partners. The Prime Minister invited Vice President Kamala Harris and Second Gentleman Douglas Emhoff to visit India. This was graciously accepted. The Prime Minister's meeting with Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison was the first in-person meeting that the two leaders have held in the post-pandemic period. They discussed a broad range of issues which covered bilateral, regional, and global issues of mutual interest. They noted with satisfaction the high-level engagement between the two countries, particularly the first recently held India-Australia 2+2 dialogue, which was held in New Delhi. They reviewed progress since the last Leaders Summit that was held virtually in June 2020, and they resolved to continue their close partnership and cooperation for the mutual well-being of both sides. I must say that the Prime Minister mentioned that the Indian community was very well looked after during the COVID crisis in Australia. He especially mentioned that to the Prime Minister, and I think there was an appreciation of the contribution of the Indian diaspora in Australia. The Prime Minister's meeting with the Prime Minister of Japan, His Excellency Mr. Yoshihide Suga, was also the first in-person meeting that the two leaders have had. The Prime Minister has spoken to Prime Minister Suga on a number of occasions. They have jointly inaugurated the Varanasi International Convention Center, Rudraksha, but as I said, this was virtually done. Prime Minister Suga was to visit India, but could not do so because of the COVID pandemic, and both sides attached great importance. And Prime Minister Suga mentioned that specifically on a number of occasions to the special relationship that India and Japan enjoy and the global partnership that binds the two countries together. The Prime Minister specifically thanked Prime Minister Suga for very successfully hosting both the Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics in the midst of a global pandemic. The two Prime Ministers discussed exchange views on recent global developments, including Afghanistan. They also reaffirmed their commitment towards the free, open, inclusive Indo-Pacific region. They agreed to enhance bilateral security and defense cooperation, including in the areas of defense equipment and technologies. They also welcomed increasing economic engagement, including the launch of the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative between India, Japan, and Australia, which has been an ongoing dialogue since last year. There was emphasis on the need to develop bilateral partnerships in manufacturing, in the MSME sector, skill development. Prime Minister Suga informed the Prime Minister that in order to operationalize the specified skilled workers agreement, as you know, we have a mobility agreement which enables Indian professionals to work in Japan for certain periods of time. The Japanese side has decided to initiate skills training and language training in India from early 2022. Both sides discussed the COVID pandemic, the importance of digital technologies in dealing with the pandemic. The India-Japan digital partnership was also mentioned, especially in the startup sector, and they exchanged views on further collaborations in areas like 5G and cybersecurity. The two Prime Ministers reaffirmed their commitment to advance efforts to facilitate the smooth and timely implementation of the Mumbai-Ahmedabad high-speed rail project. There was a mention of the bilateral development projects that Japan is supporting, especially in the northeastern part of India, under the India-Japan Act East Forum. Noticed possibilities of further such cooperation in areas such as healthcare, disaster management, and bamboo value chain development. I'm talking about the northeast. Both sides expressed confidence that the momentum achieved in the relationship in the last few years would continue under the new administration in Japan. And Prime Minister said he looked forward to welcoming the next Prime Minister of Japan to India for the India-Japan Annual Summit. As you can appreciate, the ongoing visit of the Prime Minister has added momentum to the pace, depth, and diversity of bilateral relations and strengthened our convergence on issues of mutual interest. I don't know if the Master wants to add anything.
I think you have been very comprehensive.
So then we are happy to go on to the...
Thank you. As per the ground rules, please identify yourself and the organization you present for. Okay, please.
So I'm Siddhant from...
Microphone's coming your way.
Hi, so I'm Siddhant from Beyond. My question is, during the bilateral with the Australian Prime Minister, was there any mention of the AUKUS security pact? Did he briefed about the pact? He's already done so during the phone conversation. Also, with the Japanese Prime Minister, any review when it comes to the bullet train project?
So would you like to take a few questions? Or? Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, please go ahead. We'll take a few questions together and we'll come.
Sir, you said that in the meeting with Vice President Kamala Harris, views were exchanged on regional developments. Was it specifically regarding Afghanistan? And did the issue of Pakistan emboldening Taliban come into play there? Because today in New York, Antony Blinken has met Shah Mahmood Qureshi, and he has appreciated the fact that Pakistan was helpful, according to him, in getting Americans out of Afghanistan.
There are no questions immediately.
To respond to Siddhant's question, the Prime Minister Morrison did briefly mention, the rationale from the Australian side in seeking to initiate the AUKUS alliance. He felt that the technology that they received was appropriate, and there was a brief discussion in that regard. With regard to the bullet train, you saw that in my opening remarks I did mention that Prime Minister and the Japanese Prime Minister discussed the importance of this project. They expressed satisfaction that the project has been going well. They also noted that Prime Minister Suga had taken a special interest in moving that project forward. With regard to Prime Minister's discussions with Kamala Harris, Palki, essentially I would say that the discussions, as I mentioned, were substantive. They lasted over an hour. The meeting reflected warmth and cordiality. The discussions covered a number of areas, which included COVID-19, climate change, the issue of terrorism, and of course cooperation in the technology sector, including cooperation in cybersecurity, space, etc. In that context, when the issue of terrorism came up, the Vice President Suomoto referred to Pakistan's role in that regard. She said that there were terror groups that were working there. She asked Pakistan to take action so that these groups do not impact on US security and that of India. She agreed with the Prime Minister's briefing on the fact of cross-border terrorism and the fact that India had been a victim of terrorism for several decades now, and on the need to rein in and closely monitor Pakistan's support for such terrorist groups. The discussion, as I said, was on a number of very wide range of issues, and I was specifically responding to what you mentioned regarding Pakistan.
Thank you, sir. Please, Rakshan, go on.
So I'm Abhishek from Republic TV. Sir, basically my question is both in the engagement that Prime Minister had with the Prime Minister of Japan and the one with Prime Minister of Australia, did the reference of China's conduct over the last couple of years come in?
Sriram Lakshman from The Hindu. Mr. Foreign Secretary, can you characterize for us how you expect tomorrow's meeting with President Biden to differ from today's meeting with Vice President Harris? Is it going to be more of the same, or are there going to be specific differences between the two meetings? Second question, Vice President Harris referred to the importance of preserving democratic norms within our two countries, India and the United States. Was there further discussion on this during the closed-door bilateral? Thank you.
Well, in Prime Minister's bilaterals with the Prime Ministers of Australia and Japan, discussions, as I said, were wide-ranging, encompassing a number of issues that involved bilateral and regional issues of interest. Obviously, the issue of China as a very major global player did come up, and of course this was one of the many issues that were discussed. With regard to the meeting tomorrow, I think it would be. I would say that I would be preempting things. I would be prejudging things if I were to tell you how that meeting and what exactly was to be the discussions there. I can only say that the meeting with the Vice President, as I mentioned to you, was substantive, was very warm, and encompassed a number of areas of interest. As I said, the only difference is that the Prime Minister had not met Vice President Kamala Harris before. He has met President Biden on a number of occasions when he had visited the United States when President Biden was the then Vice President. I did mention earlier that they had met in 2014, and nobody knows that better than our ambassador, who was here even at that time in a different capacity, that they had that President Biden had hosted our Prime Minister to lunch when he made his first visit to the United States in 2014. He had also he had also presided over the joint session of the U.S. Congress that the Prime Minister had addressed in 2016. So there is already a certain amount of familiarity, understanding and friendship between the two leaders. The Prime Minister has spoken to President Biden on at least 3 occasions in November last year to congratulate him on winning the elections, in February and April this year. He has also been with President Biden in 3 summits, all of which were virtual. 2 of them were hosted by President Biden, the Quad Virtual Summit in March, the Climate Change Summit in April, and then they were together at the G7 summit at Cornwall in the UK, but the Prime Minister had participated virtually on that occasion. So what I'm trying to say is that there is a fairly a reasonable amount of interaction already, and that's the only difference I can discern at this point of time. I don't want to prejudge what would be the discussions tomorrow. With regard to the Vice President's comments on democracy, which you heard, you were there when the remarks were made to the media. The Vice President, I think, appreciated the fact that both of our countries represented large and successful democracies, and that we needed to continue to work not only within our own countries but with other countries to promote the brand of democracy. In the discussions, I think she did mention that the U.S. Congress was highly appreciative and kept noting the fact that India and the United States represented the 2 largest democracies. There was a great deal of appreciation of how both our democracies functioned, and that was the I would say, discussion that took place in the actual meeting, in which the media was not present.
So thank you very much for the presence. I think that brings us to a close. The special media briefing today evening. We'll try to organize one tomorrow evening or later. I thank the presence of Foreign Secretary, our Ambassador Sandhu, and Mrs. Rao. Good evening. Thank you all for being here.